Anyone who does not fly fish prior to hearing this information should increase the credit on their visa and quit their job immediately. You'll thank me later. Fly fishing for trout is arguably the most exciting form of fly fishing that there is. To fool an educated trout into thinking that an artificial fly made out of feathers and fur is an actual food form that they eat is the ultimate goal of fly fishing. This is not easily achieved, and especially if a particular location calls for a particular technique. After learning the basic essentials of fly fishing, instinct kind of tends to take over in many situations. For example, a decision to change a fly or to move from a seemingly productive spot may be due to factors like position on the bank, sunlight, the time of day, and other determinants will also tell the seasoned fly fishermen to alter their approach. In my opinion, casting is the most important factor when fly fishing. To be able to place a fly delicately in an accurate manner from a distance is the art of casting. For some, casting can be the most frustrating part of fly fishing, especially for the beginner. It's not an easy skill to acquire, but can be mastered with lots of practice. The basic overhead cast is the first to be learned by the novice. This cast forms the foundation for all other casting techniques. It's basically lifting the line up off of the water, straight up and out behind you, and to load the rod on your back cast, and then place it forward in a slight hammer tapping motion of the wrists, which is called your forward cast. The shooting line cast is based on the overhead cast and allows a little bit greater distance to be achieved by increasing the amount of line you use during your back and forward cast. This is used to make adjustments while casting to increase accuracy and distance, which is also used in the single and double haul techniques, which are more advanced casting techniques, which allows you to incorporate the shooting line and the basic overhead cast all in one to maximize distance and accuracy. The roll cast is also a very useful technique, which allows one to cast without using a back cast. Might be hard to understand if you don't fly fish very much, but just picture bushes behind you where you don't have room to back cast. You will be able to roll the rod in such a way to transfer the power from the rod to the line and roll it out onto the water. Techniques and tactics, depending on the location and the size of the water that one is fishing, there are numerous techniques and tactics that may be applied. Generally, a larger western freestone type river demands different approaches than does a small spring creek. Larger western type rivers typically have lots of boulders, fast currents, rapids, pockets of riffles, and they demand particular tactics to fish those particular areas. Trout in those types of rivers seldom grow large because of the lack of the rich alkaline water, which is very abundant in chalk streams and other spring creeks. Chalk streams, they originate in limestone, basically, and it creates an extremely nutrient-rich water, which allows trout to grow very big, which many spring creeks are like that. The ability to read the water you are fishing is invaluable. What may seem to be one thing on the surface can be completely different 10 feet below the water. It's very misleading, and the places that a trout will be, it depends on a few key factors. Mainly the season and time of the day are the most telling factors. Different parts of the season, trout can be found in extremely different places. The time of the day is also a big factor. Generally during low light hours, trout can be found cruising in shallower, much thinner water. They're much more comfortable in low light. In the middle of the daytime, when it's extremely bright and sunny, you know, trout are just like humans. We wear sunglasses, they hide down in the shade. All these factors are determinants in the approach of the fly fisherman. Stealth and delicate presentation are the main attacks, but various tactics may be used. These include things like upstream and downstream presentation for very spooky trout, fast and quiet water nymphing, Freestone River tactics, chalk stream tactics, the Sawyer method, which is a certain way to nymph in a river, and bank fishing. Other tactics may be applied, but it depends on the particular situation. Fly tying is a very important aspect of fly fishing. Many people don't tie their own flies. It's not only an art form, but it's actually extremely rewarding to create your own fly made out of natural feathers and fur, and to actually go out and use the fly that you created to fool a trout is extremely rewarding. I do have a few flies to show you. Like I mentioned before, there are 4 basic categories of flies: the dry fly, the wet fly, the nymph, and the streamer. The dry fly, like I mentioned before, it's made to float on the surface of the water in the film of the surface. They represent adult flies that hatch. Here is a couple examples. We've got a blue-winged olive, extremely small mayfly imitation. We've got an adult caddis, a little bit bigger imitation, very common in local Oregon rivers, and another similar mayfly pattern. Mayflies are probably the most abundant adult hatching insects there are. I do have a few wet flies. Soft hackle flies. Actually, here is a good example of a typical soft hackle fly, similar to a dry fly in profile. You fish it just below the surface of the water, a little bit lower in the column than a dry fly. Here's a couple examples of nymphs. Here's a damselfly nymph, very common in still waters, backwaters of lakes, green and brown in color, common dark eyes. Here's a common Calabatus nymph. It's a version of a mayfly, very common in lakes, reservoirs. Bait fish patterns. Bait fish patterns, streamers, they're also known as, usually quite colorful, larger. They imitate small minnows and fish. It's a very common Mickey fin, been around for years. This imitates a chub minnow, very common in Central Oregon lakes. And here is a bait fish streamer pattern of my own creation. Very colorful and effective. Like I mentioned, those are the 4 main categories. There are a few more. Many other categories, thousands of different flies. The streamer, the nymph, the dry fly, the soft hackle are definitely the 4 most important. There's literally thousands of variations of all of them. And to be successful at using these patterns, casting and approaches, one needs to be able to change their tactics and act on instinct based on experience when stalking trout. Basically, being able to think like a trout is more advantageous than one might think. It's an essential part of fly fishing, and learning which fly to use or which technique to use in a particular situation requires a lot of practice and a lot of patience. The proper fly, presented at the proper time, generally brings forth the proper result.